Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire that's in development, Senegal is also moving forward. Also had the director from the Paraguay Space Agency. We also had a chance to talk about in the afternoon how we might get academic institutions, and we had deans or representatives of deans from various engineering schools participate in that. Yesterday, we moved on to talk about space exploration from the point of view of the sustainability of space operations itself, as well as space settlement, as in how do we actually support African ambitions and aspirations in doing work in terms of participating in various programs such as the Artemis Accords. So today we're going to be talking about the space for the SDGs. And we go right into talking about the high level by having people from various agencies. We have with us Dr. Delana Zhao. He is from the Angolan Space Agency. We have Misha Kinwan, who is the Space Education Officer of the Africa Union. We have somebody from the Maldives Space Research Organization, Dr. Nashra, and we also have somebody from Interspace, Dr. Omar Imam. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm going to go ahead and start with the Africa Union, maybe to give us an overview from an Africa Union perspective, and then we'll go to Angola, and then we'll go to Interspace, and then baby on the block. Is it Maldives or is it Mauritius? I believe it is Maldives. I think Mauritius said they couldn't make it. Space Research Organization. So, Misha Kinwan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Claire. Can you hear me?
I believe.
Can you hear me?
If you could unmute. Right. If you could make him a co-host, please, to make sure he can unmute his camera.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Go ahead and start your camera.
I apologize. I may not be able to put up the camera right now because of it's 5 a.m. here. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Claire, for organization of this conference. I think it's one of the best to bring us together in the diversity of different areas that we need collaboration, especially going by the theme, international collaboration to bring all the players together to make, space more affordable, more accessible, and making it more democratic. So at the African Union, as you know, we are conducting an exercise and we have completed right now to form the African Space Agency, which is leading the efforts to ensure that Africa stays in the forefront when it comes to the space programs. And we started off with a strategy and a policy, which was adopted at the highest level of the organization, and that strategy and policy was followed through with a statute, which formed the African Space Agency as the main body. And the strategy focuses on the four main domains, which is Earth observation, satellite communication, navigation, positioning, and astronomy and space sciences. And the African Space Agency is, given the mandate to implement, to oversee, and also to harmonize the African space segment or the sectors that we have. We have taken some steps forward. The governance itself of the African Space Agency is being set currently. We have the African Space Council, which is operational at the moment. We just had, the 9 out of 10 of the members of the council being substantively elected, and that forms, the highest body of the governance of the African Space Agency. Now, this is to mean that the operations of this organ is supposed to be rolled out in about, maximum 1 year's time, which means that we are moving fast in terms of implementation, and then the programs will be defined. But I want to emphasize mostly on the foundational capacity, which is the main theme of these on this section. So as you know, capacity building is equally important in terms of the critical mass that is needed to drive the space agenda. There is a qualified mass of scientists and engineers who are on the continent and abroad, and all of them contributing in different ways. But focusing on building the foundational capacity, I think it starts from elementary schools, and it starts from as early as possible in the schooling sector or in the education system, and therefore introducing curriculum of space in this university before the universities is very important. At the African level, we have the Pan-African University. There is an Institute of Space Sciences, which is supposed to be implemented based in South Africa. The implementation has not started yet, but this is focusing on the master and PhD level. But going lower, I think the role of the national universities and the national education system is to really put up, curriculum that allows people to choose as early as possible the space disciplines, and it starts from the STEM courses or the subjects, which are foundationally the physics and mathematics, encouraging more of STEM education, encouraging people to join more of the science and technology and engineering, hands-on training, which includes CubeSat, testing with different devices that are required in the in the space sector, whether it's at the ground level or at the space segment level. And it starts with efforts like, building antennas for receiving stations, simple antennas that kids can build from simple modules like, different microcontrollers that are now available. I would say that we are living in a time where technology is more diversified and people can, get small devices and use them in school for more hands-on. And this requires capacity shifting or shifting of the curriculum from the theoretical way of doing things to the practical way of doing things. So I believe we will have more time to discuss this in the debate or in the panel. So I won't take much of the time. But I'm really grateful that this conference is happening at the right time in Accra, Ghana, to emphasize on the need for the foundational capacity development on the space segment.
Thank you so much, Misha Kinua. Again, Misha Kinua is a Space Education and Training Officer from the Africa Union. We're going to go now to Dr. João Zolano João from the Angola Space Agency. If you could, I'm not sure if you're able to turn on your camera, but please, you have the floor. Dr. João. Are you able to turn your sound? Okay, let me take Dr. Imam since he's online. If you could turn on your camera, Dr. Imam, to see if you're there.
Hello?
Fabulous, thank you. Dr. Omar Iman from Interspace, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. I don't know if can I share a slide or just talk? So yeah, indeed, space is becoming really the most important activities that we need to educate and promote in many countries and many continents, including Africa. And of course, activities such as the African Space Agency is moving forward to achieving goals to use space for the benefit of humankind and improving the standard and improving the quality of life in many aspects in terms of looking at the Earth's environment and looking at sustainability both on the ground and in space. So many of the initiatives that have been started, including those, for example, by other agencies such as Egyptian Space Agency, Algerian Space Agencies, and South African Space Agency, aim to develop low-cost satellites that can be afforded by many countries that are trying to enter into the space sector to be able to monitor Earth, use it for communications and navigation and so on. So CubeSats are becoming really very prevalent in the space industry and in some ways taking over the traditional satellites. We're also promoting many educational programs as part of the sort of activities for the association that we are looking at, for example, at the moment, working together with the Association of International Association for Meteorology Offices, including the African chapter, to develop training programs for teachers to teach students at different levels about the use of space and how it can be applied to everyday life in terms of monitoring the environment and meteorology aspects. So that's really what we are trying to achieve through this initiative that Interspace have set up. So Interspace is a non-profit organization referring to International Outer Space Association, registered in the UK, and we try to be effectively playing a good role in Africa as well as other areas. Hello? Hello?
Yes, we're here. We're still seeing a
Okay.
slide. Are you moving
Sorry?
your slide? Hello, are you
Yes,
hearing us?
yes, sorry, it paused for a minute. Sorry, I apologize. So
Are you
yeah,
sharing your slide? Yeah, who is
yes,
sharing your slide?
yeah, if I can, yes, I'm sharing slide. Is it showing?
Okay, okay.
Or I
It's
can do that
sharing. Your
later.
slide
It's
is
up.
being shared.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I was saying that the vision of Interspace is to support air sustainability from outer space. And really, it's our mission to encourage international collaboration between countries and organizations, some of whom not even involved in space currently, but trying to encourage them to do so. And of course, the goal of the association is to safeguard Earth's future in terms of the global warming, in terms of environmental pollution, and see how we can use the space assets to do that. And this is really what we're trying to achieve. And the objective, as I said, I've already covered basically, so I'm not going to go through that again. But our activities, and not just the space segment, which is developing satellites and space missions in collaborative approach, but also to do peripheral programs such as setting up data centers, environmental monitoring stations, geolocation, improving the positioning for example, precise agriculture, but also the educational outreach activities, as I mentioned, for example, this initiative for promoting education in Africa for understanding weather and meteorology using space assets. And so we already set up in the UK. We've not yet been publicly announced. We are still waiting to do that, hopefully in December. We have a conference called Into Space in Riyadh, and we will send out an invite to all of you to join, I hope, soon. Thank you for that, and look forward to speaking to you later on.
All right, thank you very much. Is it possible to stop sharing, Dr. Oman? So we
Yes.
can bring the other speaker up. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to go to the Maldives, right? I'm correct.
That's right.
I'm
Yeah.
not Mauritius. Yeah, it's a Maldives Space Research Organization. I'm very, very excited about the Maldives Space Research Organization because they represent the second or third small island nation in the alliance of small island states that are pushing forward. And they're certainly giving me from Jamaica the impetus to move forward the Caribbean Space Research Institute, which has been on paper for about 4 years, ever since I started the Caribbean Space Society. So I think now that I've seen you out there, I'm going to be joining. I'm going to give you the floor. And so I know you're not quite in Africa, you're in the Indian Ocean, right? But still,
right.
we want to have you because we know how isolating it is for you to be out there by yourself as a small island developing state with big aspirations to how you might do space for your blue economy. So could you go ahead and give us your words, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity. So I just like to say, the space agency or space research organization isn't something that you would typically associate with a small island developing state like the Maldives. So I've just got a slide here which shows exactly what the Maldives is. Because I found that it can be a bit hard to understand, to get an idea of where we are, to get the Maldivian context into your to perceive it correctly. So we're basically a geographically dispersed set of islands, about 1,000 islands spread out over about 1,000 kilometers. So this is just a snapshot of a couple of islands in the Maldives. So each of these is basically an island. You've got like 3 islands here, 9 islands here, and there is really small islands. But because of that, there's a lot of opportunity for space-based observation. We found that we're not typically traditional methods of surveying or collecting data on environment, given that the topic is currently about space for environment and space for SDGs, is something that's not financially or logistically feasible for the Maldives because we have so many of these islands. And because we are a small island developing state, our budget isn't really, we don't really have much of a budget to be able to facilitate carrying out environmental data collection on all of these islands, which is where the opportunity for space sort of came in. What I wanted to sort of highlight in this discussion was 2 of the challenges which we came up with as a small island developing state while going through the establishment of the Maldives Space Research Organization in the work which we're doing. So I'll refer to MESRO, Maldives Space Research Organization, as MESRO for short, because it is quite a bit of a mouthful. What we'd initially planned to do was we'd initially planned to provide our government agencies, our ministries, any relevant agencies that would be using the data with the actual data itself. We plan to be providing satellite data, hyperspectral imagery, or any other combined data sets, collected data sets, for example, with ship tracking data for marine domain awareness to these agencies as they would need it. But what we found was these agencies didn't necessarily have the capacity to be able to process this data, to use it as needed, to be able to provide tangible and useful output that they can utilize. So what we ended up actually doing was we had to change from a space data provider to an organization which would provide a full set of solutions. It's a bit hard to sort of get an idea of what that means though. So what I've done is I've put in an example here. So with this, what we're seeing is the shoreline change or erosion is a really big problem in the Maldives because we're all small islands. So it's always an issue. If you go to any of the 1,000 islands, you ask a rural community that's living there about what the biggest concern is, it's always going to be erosion. But we don't necessarily have the resources to be able to monitor it. So I'll show you an example. So on the top here, we've got Sentinel-2 imagery of an island in the Maldives. You can see how dynamic the island is. So if we were to be using traditional methods to be able to survey this, we need to go every month to this island, at minimum every month to this island, to be able to capture this change, to be able to monitor and understand it. But with space observation, what we can do is we can provide a solution where we can map the shoreline. So exactly like this, we map the shorelines based on the data that's available. We carry out some sort of analysis based on our season. So we're in the Indian Ocean, because we're in the Indian Ocean, we've got 2 different monsoons, which differ based on the winds and waves. And then we can carry out basically a set of analysis to understand and provide better understanding of how these changes are, what can happen. So this full set of solution, from providing the analysis to carrying out the research that's needed, to providing a solid foundation in terms of peer-reviewed publications that can be used by these organizations to carry out their work, is sort of the the role, the niche role that we've had to fit into to be able to utilize space observation within Maldives. So that's one of the challenges which we found. The second, which I wanted to note, was being a small island developing state. If you mention space at all, it's always going to be negatively perceived. Why the comments are going to be along the lines of, why are we using space technology? We've got other issues. We need to do this. We need to do that. We need funding for this. What we found is that even though there are significant benefits to using space technology and space observation, to be able to utilize it effectively in a country like the Maldives, you have to frame it slightly differently, because it's always, if you mention the word space satellite data, otherwise, it's always going to be perceived negatively. You're not going to get the support that you need. So what we've ended up having to the framing that we've had to do is we've had to avoid using these words, space technology, satellite data, or otherwise, but rather focus on the impacts or the effects that this technology would have. So how can we utilize it? Can it be used for shoreline? You can decrease the number of reduce the cost associated with that. So that framing sort of becomes really important when we're trying to communicate with that, rather than using that space technology or the technology part, focusing on the impacts. So there's a really lot we want to talk about, but I'll let the others get to that as well, and hopefully in the debate we can have a couple of more conversations about that.
Thank you. I'm not sure what happened with your sound a while ago, but I hope it didn't just disappear. So we're going to go back and see if we can get Dr. Zaldana João from the Angolan Space Agency. Is he able to be online, Dr. João? I'm not seeing your camera, so I know your camera is not on, but I'm seeing your microphone and you're a co-host. So could you unmute and let's see if we can hear you? Dr. Zaldana João from Angola seem to be having technical difficulties. All right, so maybe if he gets situated, he'll come on. Could I have all my speakers back on stage? Could I have Mishak? Mishak, I know you are not on camera, but I believe you're still on the call. I want to have a conversation now with the panelists. So we've heard different perspectives. One, Dr. Iman is with the Interspace, that's Interspace, that's a NGO that is really committed to supporting this work. And we've heard from the AU and we've heard from Maldives. Sorry that we didn't hear from what Angola is doing, but very different conditions with Maldives, which is very similar to what Mauritius is doing. I have to say, Maldives and Mauritius this year were neck to neck in terms of their space agendas, and both had events in the month of April. And I was just thinking before I'm asking you my question, perhaps, I don't know if Maldives fits, I don't know what grouping Maldives really is in, if you're in an Indian Ocean subgroup, but certainly you are in the Alliance of Small Island States. And I must report that the director of the Mauritius organization has decided to go forward in trying to pull together a working group for the Alliance of Small Island States. So we do have to have an off the record conversation on that. So let's talk about what could happen next. So we're talking about space for the SDGs. Each country has its own challenges. Dr. Mann, as you hear from, you know about what, let's say, the AU is trying to do, what you are able to do from where you are, and then what a country like Maldives and other very, very nascent emerging countries like Maldives have to do. We have other small island nations. We have Cape Verde, we have Mauritius, we have Madagascar, we have Sao Tome, Principe, all those African islands. From your perspective as an aggregator of knowledge and information, how do you think an organization like yours working with the AU and of course the people in Britain and USA able to really accelerate the understanding, first of all, on the political elite as the importance of what it is that space research organizations like MSR was trying to do, to fill, first of all, that mindset gap
Sure. Indeed. I mean, just like Dr. Nashwan said, the reason we want to go to space is to solve problems here on Earth. So the way we're approaching this is to say, okay, yes, indeed, building satellites and sending to space is really a very cool thing, and developing technology is really very good, and especially at this point with CubeSat, stimulating STEM education at different levels is really important. But at the end of the day, what really we need is the services that these satellite systems provide. So what we're doing is trying to generate an educational program that will help get an understanding of what we can do with this data to help improve, as I said, the quality of life. And that's exactly what we are trying to achieve. So encourage research at the ground level that uses data which is already existing. Many of remote sensing data also is available free of charge, which means that the overhead in trying to get access to such data is very little. But what is lacking is really an understanding of how to process the data and generate the services and applications needed, just like the one, for example, Dr. Nashwan showed. And now, of course, with the prevalence of AI, it is making it a little bit easier to do a lot of very complex analysis much faster. And so education is really the most important one, trying to get international collaboration. It's very good that every nation want to do a satellite, that's fine, but in my view, that it need to be a sort of collective collaboration in developing constellations, maybe being part of constellations that already exist, that will then help reduce the sort of the cost of getting into space. So getting into space is really getting access to the data rather than necessarily being in space, although I love doing satellites and building them. That's my view anyway. Just to add to that, so we have two initiatives which are two ends of the scale. So we have the Miasma Geo, which is a geostationary satellite in the ultraviolet spectrum to look at the air quality and monitoring dust and dust storms. And this is sort of the big scale project. You know, the camera itself is about 1 meter cube and about 150 kg. So that will sit on a geostationary communication satellite that will allow us to cover the Middle East and Africa with images every hour, updated every hour, giving almost real-time data for that. And we're pushing at the moment to set up the working group for this and inviting many of the scientists in the different African and Middle East countries to participate in the working group to discuss the requirements for this mission. On the other end of the scale is the CubeSat. So we're developing a CubeSat program. I was privileged to be involved in developing the payloads for this. And this is to look at, again, the atmosphere in terms of its constituents, but rather than looking at it from the space up down to Earth, it's actually scanning through the atmospheric column to allow you to give a lot of detailed information about what is in every slice of 3 kilometers of the atmospheric column from the ground up to space, basically. And combining this data from these two types of satellites, CubeSat and the large sort of mission, will give us a very comprehensive set of data that will allow us to improve the modeling of atmospheric behavior and also monitor air pollution and greenhouse gases. This is called the Miasma program.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to kind of turn to a very delicate question, because what has been popping up in my head is this is all fantastic technical stuff, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the issue of financing, because you're an NGO, Interspace, certainly the Futures Forum or Space Futures Forum is an NGO. What we've started in the Caribbean is run by NGO. MRSO is an NGO. It's not a government organization. It's a bunch of scientists and advocates who believe that government of the Maldives needs to move forward. We hear a lot about the funding available on climate issues, right? Climate finance. And I'm wondering if there is something we can do differently, because academic institutions in Africa certainly also are faced with a financing crunch. So if we're talking about developing capacity, using academic organizations, using NGOs to really develop capacity to meet these goals. So if we're talking about agriculture or ocean-based monitoring or water security or biodiversity, all the various things that we use satellite data for. And we're not, let's say, accelerating the uptake of these technologies. We may have to find ways in which NGOs can band together to sort of compel those institutions that have pledged funds for these various things to see us as part of the chain. I mean, I'm not sure. I know there's a little bit of it here and there, but not to the level. Have you seen from Maldives? You had your conference, Nashwan. Were you able to get any sort of a pledge of support in terms of financing from any of the climate finance groups that have been going to all these world meetings, World Economic Forum, COP28, all these different events?
You're absolutely right. It's financing is one of the biggest challenges which we faced. We understand that there are significant benefits, but if in order to realize these benefits, there needs to be an initial sort of financing to develop that. Even with our conference, so we had the Space for Other Nations conference in April this year. There was a second one. We struggled with getting finance for it. So internally within Maldives, that was a struggle. We had to look outside of Maldives to try and understand some of our partners, what their needs are, what those requirements are to get financing required. And you are absolutely right that getting that finance is a really big challenge. The approach that we've had to take is, rather than asking for a big pot, which is generally what's required to be able to produce something which is viable and useful for operational purposes, what we've had to do is we've had to create a minimum viable product for a lot of these services. So for example, we've created that shoreline model which we've created there. So that's basically just a minimum viable product. It doesn't give there's a lot of issues with that. There's issues with I don't know if you noticed, but there's issues with the sort of wobble in the island because our islands are so small. When the satellite images are georeferenced, it creates a small error in the different georeferencing, which creates a big error in our shoreline detection. But again, we're able to show something using a minimum product that we can then take to other finances. We can't take it to anyone in the Maldives because there's no way we're gonna get any financing through here. There's no mechanisms within the country to be able to facilitate any of this research. So what we do is we create these minimum viable products. We've done one for benthic classification, which can be used for monitoring marine, again, always putting the spin of the application itself. So monitoring of marine protected areas, understanding the changes associated with human activity on our reefs, understanding the potentially creating an early warning system for coral bleaching because that has impacts to development activities because they have to stop development activities when there is a bleaching event. So identifying these areas and then we've created a minimum viable product. It's not the best. There's a lot of improvement. We can go forward with that with an approach other finances. So for example, the UN or some of our partners, and we create a collaboration with these finances. And the reason for the collaboration is twofold. Firstly, the financing, but also because we are a really small island nation. It means we don't necessarily have the technical capacity to be able to carry out a lot of these activities. We don't have the know-how to be able to process any of these. So by creating a cohort, a consortium with some of these, say FUGRO or EOMAP or consultancy agencies who do this work, we can apply for financing much larger bits of pots of financing by creating a small project in the Maldives as a use case or test case, and we can provide the minimum viable product as an example of we've done this, we just need to improve this. It becomes a small part, unlocks financing, but it also allows us to tap into that expertise which FUGRO or EOMAP or any of these other agencies might have, and to be able to build capacity within Maldives. So we'll attach some of our team members within Maldives to that project. They'll now understand it. They'll be able to move forward with that. So it's the approach which we've taken, that's the sort of approach, rather than asking for one big pot, which is like bits and pieces here and there, trying to put it all together under a much larger roadmap. But I would just like to point out though, that's because we are not a government organization. If we were a government organization, we wouldn't have this freeway. We have the red tape associated with some of these actions which we're taking. But because we aren't an organization. We are not-for-profit, non-governmental organization, even though we do support the ministries very closely. We don't receive any direct funding from the government, and because of that, we're able to take these actions. So it's about a blessing in disguise, I'd say.
Dr. Aman, do you have anything to add to that question about the financing piece? What are your thoughts from your perspective? I mean, you're an NGO in the Global North, so are you able to identify support for the work that you're doing from the companies that are in this space, or is it equally challenging? Hello, Dr. Imam? I wonder if he's, are you hearing me?
Yes, yes. Sorry, I thought you were asking someone else. Yes, well, it is even, yeah, it is challenging also in Europe, to be honest, and also in the Middle East. So we're exploring funding for these different projects. But as Nashwan said, we try to go from sort of asking for little pots to, for example, at least do the studies, initial studies, to demonstrate the need for these bigger projects. I mean, we're talking about the mass Magio of the order of $200 million. So no one is going to pay you $200 million when they know there is no profit to be made out of it, because the idea is that all this data, that this reason we were NGO is that all the data will be then offered free of charge to the community. But the aim is then the companies and organizations and hopefully startups will be able to use the data to generate services that could potentially generate revenue. So it's a very difficult model at the moment. This is what we're trying to do, is things that typically agencies would have done and traditionally done, but because of the international nature of this project, it's very difficult to get the agencies to mobilize very quickly to do this. But as we are sort of not affiliated with any particular agency or government, we have a bit more freedom to be able to try to encourage this collaboration. So, for example, a lot of the agencies in the region have been very supportive, but when it comes for asking for funds, then that's a different story. So let's see what happens with that approach.
Yeah, we have a couple universities here in the room, and I'm wondering if or NGOs, I'm wondering if
Sorry, we lost you.
either the professor from UTAS or African Technology Innovation might look into the mic. So the financing question, I mean, we're talking about the technical part, and that is good. I think there's enough examples of technical things that are happening that we can very, let's say, easily find ways to partner, right? But even at the best, even to get basic, let's say, off-the-shelf equipment, sometimes it still requires financing. How are you experiencing as an academic institutions in the developing country, government institution, where we are, All Nations is a private institution, so maybe they might also want to talk about their way of raising funds for their projects. But can you speak to this issue of raising funds for research or for the satellite stuff that you're interested in? You have different topographies, so your interests in terms of the SDGs, maybe in Cote d'Ivoire, you're looking at things like biodiversity, right? Where you are located in Cote d'Ivoire, which is heavily forested, whereas perhaps the northern part of Ghana is very dry. You might be looking at water or climate issues in a different way. But regardless, you're going to need certain basic equipment to do your research and to contribute to the global knowledge as to where things are. Are you finding that the climate finance people are at all open to conversations with your universities? Is there a microphone for them, please? Can you start here? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm Dr. Kobena Fusuamankwa from CK Tadem University of Technology and Applied Sciences, Navrongo, Ghana. When it comes to financing of projects in the institutions, is very difficult because in Ghana, we say that tertiary institutions or research institutions in general are not profit-making organizations. And as such, mostly they are funded by the government. But I'm of view that if we try to change this idea and perhaps include the private institutions or private companies or persons, they will be able to contribute something. For example, let's say you need an equipment in the lab and our students pay lab fees. But at the moment, you are not in a state to buy the equipment, and you tell maybe a private person that, fine, we need this laboratory equipment. If you sponsor it, maybe a certain portion of the lab fees that the students pay will be given to you as a profit. I think that can bring people on board and can help promote, furnishing our laboratories and promoting research. So concerning finances in terms of climate and whatever, we hardly get anything. Thank you.
Thank you. ATI, have anything to add?
Hello. Yeah, this is Dr. Mensah, president of the African Association for Technology and Innovation. Right now, we have many countries. We have many countries in our association. We have Cote d'Ivoire, we have Senegal, we have Benin, we have Burkina Faso. So we are trying to expand our association. We have a project with MICE-IQ. Believe you know well MICE-IQ in South Africa. And our product will be launched on the high altitude balloon next month. So we'll get data from the atmosphere and they will give us the data, and then we'll do the analysis. But one of our biggest challenge is financing. It is very difficult for us because we have limited members in our association, and we have to rely only on our association. And we don't have a donation yet. We are looking for partnership. I know Intersat have a partnership with MICE-IQ, and is it possible to have a partnership with Intersat, because we want to get involved in technology, building rover robots, mobile robot, building wind panel for analog station. So, but our problem is funding. So if anybody knows any company who can help us to get some funding, that would be great for us. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to hand the mic to, and I'm going to kind of preface this question. You are at a university now, but you spent some portion of your career at the World Bank. And I wanted us to think about a strategic response. I know you can't speak for the World Bank, you have long left, but I think that perhaps we ought to think about, from an African perspective, revisiting how academic institutions in Africa, especially the engineering schools and the science schools, really engage the World Bank in a different way. Because I find in my years of being in Washington, D.C. and in this space trying to harass people to do things, I was unable to get at a nice proposal I had developed for a partnership between American universities, engineering schools, and African engineering schools. It didn't go anywhere. I actually gave it to AID, and the person said, you have to get a private sector company to endorse it before AID will even look at it, because, you know, who are you to come up with this brilliant idea, right? And it was about basically doing, a lot of US professors need to do international research to be tenured, right? So I thought, oh, wow, you know, since to be tenured, what if we pick research relevant to some key elements in Africa? So it could be water, health, energy, you know, so these are like big picture issues: energy, water, food security, and health. And provide World Bank funding with private sector partnership, like, so create a multi-donor fund approach to support US universities and professors who are doing applied research, not theoretical research, applied research that could solve one of these problems. And I couldn't get past my proposal, right? Nobody was, this is many years ago, mind you, I think I had just left the IDB, so it would have been like 2010, 2011. I couldn't get past anybody with this idea. But maybe I was premature as usual with my ideas long before people thought about it. Maybe now that we have a different climate, from your perspective, having worked at the World Bank and understanding these spaces, African development, how might African universities organize differently to purposely get some applied research funding? They probably won't do the basic theoretical science, but applied research funding that would support the SDGs and tie it back to the space for the SDGs question.
Thank you very much. My name is Pierre Urugu from National Polytechnic Institute in Cote d'Ivoire. Based on my experience from the World Bank and the African Development Bank, I think I will agree with what we just said. Those multilateral institutions have several year program with each country. And those programs have some priorities. And unless your own government includes you in that particular program, then if you make a proposal, it will not go anywhere. And that's what happened. In fact, what we have observed is that it is very difficult to get them to focus on what I will call frontier kind of study or research or high technical research. Their concern is more on basic social, educational, basic educational orientation. And it's very difficult to get African Development Bank. We have recently at my institution, we have organized a workshop on research, and we have invited the African Development Bank. We have, I know some people over there, and I even call on the vice president in charge of research, and finally they decline. Okay, so it is very difficult to get those people involved in this kind of research. Now, talking about financing, even with the government structure, it's not easy, as I was saying yesterday, it's not easy to have them and focus on an issue like space. And the way we have approached the situation in Cote d'Ivoire is to go through the need to have a space agency, and through the space agency to have a government funding for that. And this we have already agreed upon, and I think the proposal is on the table with funding. But beside that, our institution also is now trying to generate its own funding to support those kind of initiatives. And with the new, we are a public institution, but the new regulation that allow us to generate funding from private sources, we started doing that. And we think that going forward, we will be able to have funding for those kind of research and initiative. I should add that in the past, the Polytechnic Institute has been regarded as a teaching institution, not a research institution. Only also it is the top university in Cote d'Ivoire, but that because the faculty that teach over there are very high level faculty, and they have the best publication record amongst the university in Cote d'Ivoire. So it is only last year that the institute is organized in terms of research, and I am the first person to be appointed as in charge of research. So it's not even a year now. So we haven't put up all the structure yet, and we haven't put up all the funding mechanism yet. So, but we hope that we will do it from my experience teaching in the US and also in Asia, I think that we have some model that we can follow, and I'm look forward to make some change in the institute.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if Dr. Joao is on the call and is able to respond, but if he is, just raise your hand so we know you're able to respond. Mishak, before I go to Terry has his hand up. Mishak, you're still on the call. What do you have to say from an AU perspective? I know a lot of your work is funded by the EU. I'm not sure. I know the African Union has this as a huge agenda. And I'm wondering, given, for example, all the and maybe really can't answer this question given your level, but you can tell me if you can't answer it. I'm thinking out loud and I'm thinking, okay, you have all these mining companies that's making a fortune really in Africa. We need to have satellite monitoring of the environmental waste, climate, whether it's the pollution by air or water. Is there any way that there can be sort of a and maybe it's the academics and NGOs who have to do it if the AU can't do it politically. But how might we levy some funding from these mining companies that are doing very well to raise funds for some of this satellite work that countries ought to be doing for themselves? What are your thoughts on that? Misha, Kinua?
Yes, Dr. Claire, this is an interesting conversation. Hope you can hear me.
Yes?
Okay,
He can
perfect. So,
answer it. Or
yeah.
Can you answer that question? It's a tricky question for somebody
So
in
I would
this.
just, I would just contribute into the discussion generally, and if I can go to the specific, that's fine. I just need to give you a perspective of how, the AU works. It's an intergovernmental body, and most of at least the funding mechanism comes from the member states, which are the countries themselves through subscription. But the agenda for financial sustainability has been on the table for a long time, and we looked at different models in which financing can be sustained. One of them is to use taxes, internally generated taxes, and ensure that the budgets are funded. But as you realize with the AU, we have been trying to shift from the traditionally or the traditional focus of peace and security and political affairs, and slowly involving science, technology, and innovation as the main driver for this, for the achievement of all the aspirations, or what we call the moonshots now. So the STR, traditionally, the African Union has not been implementing programs until recently, when we have managed to at least even put a space agenda on the table. And we have seen a lot of progress, like I mentioned, to the level of formation of the African Space Agency to lead that agenda. And the African Outer Space Program is a flagship of the African Agenda 2063 now. Which means there is a specific focus on implementing space, but we are all pulling from a very small pot of funding, which is not sufficient really to implement tangible or big programs. So we have leveraged on international partnerships, like you mentioned. We have a project that we are implementing, co-funded with European Union and African Union, which is called GMES in Africa. And what we have realized in this program, it's an Earth observation program, because as someone mentioned, these funding mechanisms sometimes come through specific issues that you're solving. It may not be about space specifically, but it may look at the different issues that you're trying to solve at your level, or at the continental level, or at whatever level, and then being able to leverage that to fund your space program, which is not ideal most of the time. So through GMS in Africa, we have formed what we call a consortia of different institutions, and we obliged the research institutions to collaborate with the government agencies and to collaborate with academia, and most importantly, also to collaborate with the private sector, or the what we call the industry, in order to develop services that are more enhanced. We have seen that this model works, that initially most of the programs in Earth observation used to sideline academia and private sector. But by involving these two bodies, you have a triple helix model that is bringing up, synthesized services that are able to go to the communities, and we have now more tangible and more meaningful services that are saving lives and are improving, the management of natural resources and marine and coastal areas, etc. So going forward, if this model can be applied in different other sectors, say satellite communication and different other segments of space, it would be a success in my view. But I also want to highlight that, as someone mentioned, that even though we are focusing on the downstream, I think Africa is also poised to leverage on the three segments. We are talking about the ground infrastructure, which is the receiving and enabling people to go to space and to have space access. We are also talking about, having the space segment like satellites and many other spacecrafts that are useful for acquiring this different data that we need. And then we're talking about the downstream services, which is a big market in which you're solving specific issues. There is availability, there is a lot of people say that there's a lot of free data, but also availability becomes an issue. And on the African continent, I think the community has been suffering, getting real-time information to be able to make decisions, or even to analyze and make those decisions. So this is where the gap is, and I think we don't really need to stop accessing space from our point of view. We still need to participate in the space segment and ensure that we have, our own satellite in space that have data that can be shared across. And I think this is where the African Space Agency comes in. It's about developing programs that different countries can participate in as joint missions, and develop satellites that are useful for not only one country, but all the countries. And also on the downstream side, I think we also need to empower a lot the industry, which is upcoming on the continent. There are about, more than 400 or close to 500 now startups that are dealing with just, the downstream sector of space, which is mostly Earth observation. And we need to empower these industries. Most of them are at the startup level, and the funding is not very consistent on the African continent because of the different things that discourage or the different indices that usually don't favor incoming funding from abroad. And we need to get out of this context that the African continent is growing, and we need to improve or get the word out there that that the investors' confidence is assured when they invest in the space segment on the continent, because I think it has been very unfair to suffocate funding that comes from outside or internally into space. And this is where the conversation needs to happen on how do we create that environment for enabling both investments and government funding to ensure that the space programs or the industry, the space industry on the continent is thriving. And I think international partnerships are very important, but also intra-African collaborations are equally important. And it should be cross-sectoral, in my view. It's not just academia to academia. It should be, a mix of academia collaborating with private sector collaborating with government institutions, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. We certainly would like to see some of that. And I'm thinking that we need to maybe rethink how we organize, because if we don't do something to make a shift, it's not going to happen. Before I bring you back, let me ask, Terry has had his hand up for a long time online.
Yes.
So you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear.
Oh, good morning, everybody. So thank you so much for having me. Thierry Marshall from Cosmolab from Benin Republic. So good talks since morning. I want to highlight something really important before asking my question, which is, you know, research development and development is the backbone of space flight and space applications. So, and something that we all have to be aware of in Africa, which is lacking us, is investing in research development, in general talking, not necessarily in space before. Because I know, even if at university and in government, there are no specific budget and budget to support research development. And if we do not invest and have focus on that, we still facing and complaining last year or 5 years later, we come back and having the same conversations. That's something that you have to look like. And policymakers have to look at that point, really important. And something that we have to add to that, looking at the downstream application as Misha raised, for sure, there's a big opportunities and market there around, but we do not need necessarily to be focused on specific field and domains, such as we know agriculture, public, clean waters, health security, food security, all those stuff that are important for us. But the focus, like what I want to mean is innovation comes from everywhere. So people is not because agriculture matters. All people or everyone should go to agriculture, but we have to expand the research and every domain to exploit everywhere of all opportunities and resources we have. And some things that from the 3 decades now, I'm observing the world and everything is happening. And what I notice is for other continents, people use investment from insurance companies. Like, what's about corporate social responsibility, CSR, from companies, institutions that we have in our countries that can support those startups or organizations and institutions which are working in those domains. So how, my question which will be addressed to Meshach directly is how AU can support and enable those insurance companies, corporate social responsibilities, even if an ecosystem and facilitate an ecosystem where VC, venture capitals, can invest to support those industries, because even if it's risky, most of them do not understand the background and the importance of those technology in space, but while focusing directly in investing in food, transformation, agriculture, transformation, food transformation, and so on. So first of all, I think there is a outreach and awareness we have to teaching, sensitizing work that we have to do. And second one, establish a system that can allow those people who can invest in those initiatives. So how it can happen? How you can support that? That's my question.
Okay, the technology is wrapping up, so I think it's smaller. I saw that Dr. Iman had his hand up. If you could put back the screen, Dr. Iman had his hand up, and then I hear from
Yeah.
Dr.
Yes,
Iman, the floor is yours.
I'll be very brief. Yes, just to follow up on what Mr. Mishak said. What I just to clarify what I said, I didn't say we should not access space. Indeed, this is one of the priorities that we're trying to promote is countries to enter into the space segment. But prior to that, while we're waiting for funding and developing the know-how and skill to do that, it's really important to educate and promote downstream applications, because then that will generate a need to then define the type of satellites you want to build, because we don't want to just build satellites just for the sake of building them, but building them with a target of generating data that's required. And the miasma program is one example where we have seen a big gap in coverage over Africa and the Middle East in terms of air quality and air pollution and monitoring the seas around the region to the revisit time, short revisit time that is required or generated, for example, by Sentinel-5. But we need to do the same for the continent, African continent. So indeed, the two things go hand in hand. But we need to start now, as we trying to get the funding for the bigger projects, is to do the downstream applications and encourage understanding of how to process data, but more importantly, what the need is for what data we need to acquire and at what frequency.
Dr. Mensah?
Yes. I have a question for Meshach. It has been almost 10 years since the space policy and strategy have been adopted, and the space agency, the African Space Agency, has been created this year. So a lot is expected from the space agency. We are hoping that it's not going to take 10 years before we see results. So we are counting on the African Space Agency. Now, reading the space and strategy document, I noticed that there is a lot of application of Earth observation, but not about technology or space exploration. So we are hoping that there are going to be a revision of the space agency to incorporate space technology, satellite technology, and exploration. Thank you.
Doctor.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
My question goes to Meshach. Your portfolio at AU is Space Application Training Officer. Now, I would like to know how regular you conduct your trainings and whether the trainings are online or in person, and if they are free. Then if they are free, then if you can share with us a link so that those who are interested can partake in some of these trainings, because NASA is doing that with ASSET. We also have Eurosat doing that. We have HACAST also doing that. So please let us know so that African students and enthusiasts can also participate in some of these activities. Thank you.
All right. I see Dr. Nsombe, you had a question or comment? A microphone, please.
Thank you. My question is to Dr. Imam, and I like what he said. He said, in the meantime, as we are waiting
Sorry, we lost you.
We lost everybody then.
Yeah, I'm back.
are actually reaching the right people and getting the right information on the data that's required by them.
So if you can repeat the question, because I think the
Dr. Imam?
system just paused for a while. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, certainly. I was saying you had said that while we're waiting for funds, we should do some downstream consultation, education to determine what data is required by the various stakeholders that we can design to be able to meet their needs. Is there a mechanism for identifying those stakeholders in the various countries?
Well,
I
mean,
am going to start. Okay,
yeah,
go
can you
ahead,
hear
Dr.
me?
Iman. I'm going to say something. You can pick up. Dr. Iman, I'm going to say something and then you pick up. I like that question because it's very action oriented. We really want to leave here with some next steps. So, Dr. Iman, as you think about that suggestion you made, I just want to put out that there is something called the African Association of Engineering Education. And I know space is not all engineering, but it already exists. So those of us in the room, can we think about maybe creating a space?
Sorry, we lost you. We lost your voice.
Group, aerospace working group, in your perspective, what could Interspace offer in terms of support for making that happen, that asset mapping happen? Dr.
Well,
Iman?
indeed, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Can you hear me?
We're
Yes.
hearing you.
So
We are hearing you.
Yeah, this is exactly the challenge. Yeah, this is exactly the challenge we were facing when we started to look into who will join the working group. And this is one of the reasons why the association was set up, because it's a membership organization, and we are trying to identify through hello? Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Yes. We're trying to
We're hearing
identify
you.
through
We're hearing you.
the various, yes, we're trying to identify through the various conferences, looking at the various associations that already exist, and identifying those specialists in the areas that we are trying to explore. In this case, for example, is atmospheric monitoring, but also we're looking at water monitoring, land use, and so on. And then compiling this list and inviting those people to join these working groups so we can discuss the needs. But also, in addition to that,
Okay, you are breaking up.
looking at in terms of what their need is, or even maybe in some cases guiding them to look, hello?
Yes, we're hearing you
Yes.
again.
Into that. So that's what we're doing at the moment. So the working groups we're setting up will hopefully be the seed that will then expand the network of the end users, and hopefully generate the requirements that we need to then decide a roadmap for what type of satellites are required to cover Africa in this case.
All right, we have now come to the end of this session. We have had a really rich discussion. I've heard some good ideas. Dr. Iman, we're going to follow up with you after this on this idea. I think we have some modalities to get something started. As you say, while waiting, we should probably have a asset map. We can't go to the World Bank and say we want support without knowing who is in the we, right? So I do think we have some specific marching orders we can do with some effort on our part that doesn't require any major funding. All of us have access to graduate students and former students who don't have full-time jobs that may be happy to do this as a paid internship, so it doesn't require a lot of money. So I think we need to look at that as a potential next step. So I want to thank our speakers from Maldives Space Research Organization, Dr. Imam. Maldives, we'll be back in touch with you. I'm so happy to see you. You have no idea how excited I am. We have to have a talk. All of you in the space community, satellite community, please be aware that coming out of the UN Summit of the Future NGO PrepComs, I did take the liberty of setting up a Space Matters Impact Coalition, and I'll be sending this out to all the speakers to see if they want to join, so we can again have a more unified civil society approach to ensuring our space future is indeed inclusive of all countries, peoples, nations. All right, so thank you very much. Who have I forgotten? Dr. Joao was not able to join us. He was online, but he wasn't able to speak. Thank him nonetheless for signing on. From Angola, he's the director of the Angolan Space Agency. Thanks, Misha Kinoa, for joining us. And I think that's the 4 people who were here. Ernest from PMAT, who is here, should have been on this session, but I'm sure he's around, so he'll be joining us at some point in the day to talk about what All Nations is doing and what All Nations plans are. So we're going to move to our next session. Just take a quick 5-minute break, stretch, and move to our next session. And people are already waiting to be on the call. We don't want to make up for time. So let's try to get started immediately at 10:35. Thank you again all for being here. I look forward to working with you in the future. Take care.